Why is it always people like you who think they're exempt from policy? Maybe after this, everyone else will remember what happens when company standards are ignored.
Gregory reached into his briefcase. The clippers came out buzzing. The clippers reached Francine's hairline. With one slow pass, he shaved a strip through her natural hair in front of the entire company.
You should thank me. Most CEOs wouldn't bother correcting an employee personally.
Francine remains perfectly still and let every second of it happen.
I hope this was worth it, Mr. Gregory.
What Gregory didn't know was that he had just crossed a line that would cost him far more than his reputation. Before continuing, comment where in the world you are watching from and make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow's story is one you can't miss. The elevator doors opened on the 40th floor, and Francine Warren stepped out like she owned the place. She did. But nobody here knew that yet. She wore a simple gray blazer and dark slacks. Temp clothes, unremarkable clothes. Clothes designed to make people look right past her. Her natural hair fell in a long, clean blowout past her shoulders. She carried a tote bag and a coffee from the lobby. She looked like exactly what she was supposed to look like, a 42-year-old administrative temp who needed the work. She was not that, but she was very good at being it. The Pinnacle Group offices spread out in front of her. Open floor plan, floor-to-ceiling windows, a view of Chicago that cost someone a lot of money. Glass offices lined the perimeter. The center was a grid of workstations filled mostly with women. The glass offices were filled mostly with men. Francine noticed that in the first 10 seconds. She noticed everything in the first 10 seconds. The receptionist, young, blonde, already slightly harassed-looking at 8:45 in the morning, handed Francine a visitor badge and pointed her toward a desk near the administrative pool. Francine thanked her and walked toward it slowly, eyes moving. She counted the framed photos on the executive wall beside the reception desk. 12 men, 1 woman, and that woman was shaking hands with a man who was clearly the real subject of the photo. She passed the elevator bank on the far side and stopped. It was laminated, mounted on the wall at eye level, clean and professional, like a fire safety notice. Pinnacle Group, professional standards, appearance and presentation. Francine read it from the top. Dress code, hygiene guidelines, client-facing conduct, standard corporate language. Then she reached the bottom section. Hair must be neat, controlled, and non-distracting to the professional environment. Voluminous, unrestrained, or culturally specific styles may require prior approval from department leadership before client-facing appearances. She read it twice. She took out her phone and photographed it. She sent the photo to Sharon Mallory, her attorney of 14 years, with 4 words. They put it in writing. Sharon responded in under a minute. These people have no idea. Francine almost smiled. Almost. She found her assigned desk, sat down, and got to work. Not the temp work. Not yet. The real work. The kind she'd been doing since she arrived in cities like this at 28, with nothing but a sharp mind and a shorter patience for being underestimated. She watched how the office breathed. Who walked fast? Who walked carefully? Who looked up when a certain door opened? That door, the corner office at the far end of the floor, belonged to Gregory Holt. She hadn't seen him yet. She'd seen his decisions. She'd spent 3 months reviewing Pinnacle's financials before she ever booked the temp placement. She knew he'd restructured executive compensation 18 months ago, adding $14 million in bonuses for himself and 4 VPs while cutting the janitorial contracts, gutting the administrative pool, and dissolving an entry-level analyst team. She knew the pattern of those cuts, the way you know something was deliberate. They fell, almost entirely, on black and brown employees and women over 40. She came here to see the man behind those numbers in person, to watch him move through a room before she decided what to do with his company. That was how Francine worked. She always watched first. The woman at the desk beside her moved quietly and efficiently, head down, doing the work of someone who had learned that visibility was a liability. Late 40s, Nigerian-American, a careful and contained energy. Her nameplate read, B. Ordell, payroll. Betty? Francine had seen Betty's name in the employee records. 20 years at Pinnacle. Twice passed over for the payroll manager position before finally receiving it. 3 years ago, after both men ahead of her left. Not promoted. Just last one standing. Francine recognized something in Betty's posture. The exact science of taking up as little space as possible. The discipline of it. She'd practiced that science herself once. For years, in offices not so different from this one, before she decided she'd rather own the building than learn to disappear inside it. That evening, Francine returned to her hotel and opened her laptop. She pulled up Pinnacle's financials alongside her Warren Capital ownership documents and went through them line by line. The executive bonuses, the staffing cuts, the policy poster with its careful corporate language that meant one very specific thing to the 34 women in that administrative pool. She closed the laptop. One more week, she told herself. Watch. Then move. She believed that when she said it. Wednesday morning came fast. Francine had spent Tuesday the same way she'd spent Monday, watching, learning, cataloging. She knew which VPs arrived late and which assistants covered for them. She knew the break room had 2 microwaves, but only one was allowed for the executive floor. She knew that Betty Ordell ate lunch alone at her desk every single day. She was ready for Wednesday. Gregory Holt called the all-hands meeting at 9 a.m. 63 employees filed into the main conference room, a wide, glass-walled space with a long mahogany table and enough chairs along the walls for the overflow. Francine took a seat near the front. Not to be seen, to see. Gregory walked in at 9:04. He was bigger than she'd expected. Broad-shouldered, silver at the temples. The kind of man who filled a room not just physically, but atmospherically. Like the air rearranged itself when he entered. He wore his suit the way certain men wear suits. Like armor. Like proof. He moved to the head of the table without acknowledging anyone, set down his folder, and looked out at the room with the easy confidence of someone who had never once doubted that every seat in the place existed for his benefit. Jonathan stood to his right, 26 years old and already practicing his father's posture. Chin up, shoulders back, a small smile that wasn't quite a smile, more like a placeholder for one. Gregory opened with financials. Numbers Francine already knew were selectively trimmed. He presented Pinnacle's quarter as a success story, crediting leadership vision 4 times in 8 minutes. He did not credit the administrative staff who processed the paperwork or the analysts who built the reports. Francine watched 3 women along the wall write things down dutifully and wondered if any of them had stopped expecting to be acknowledged. Then came the vision statement. Gregory spoke about Pinnacle's future with the conviction of a man who believed his own mythology completely. Francine had met men like this before. The danger with them wasn't their cruelty, it was their certainty. They never thought they were doing anything wrong. They thought they were doing everything right. The room was nodding. The room had learned to nod. Then Gregory looked at her. It wasn't a glance. It was a stop. A full, deliberate pause in the middle of a sentence, long enough that the people nearest him followed his gaze, and then others did too. A slow ripple of attention turning toward Francine like a wave. Her hair. She knew immediately. Her natural blowout, full, healthy, falling past her shoulders, had been drawing quiet looks since Monday. This was different. This was Gregory deciding to do something about it. "This is actually a good moment," he said. His voice was pleasant. That was the worst part of it. How pleasant he made it sound. A good moment to revisit our professional standards, since some of us are still getting acquainted with how we do things here. He opened his folder and produced a printed copy of the policy. He read the hair clause aloud, slowly, clearly, every word landing like it was meant to. 63 people heard it. Not one of them looked at Gregory while he read it. They all looked at Francine. He finished reading. Then he looked up at her directly for the first time. "We hold everyone to the same standard," he said. "That's not discrimination. That's fairness." The silence in the room was the kind that had weight. Francine held his gaze. She kept her voice level, professional, stripped of every sharp edge she was feeling. "I understand the policy, Mr. Holt. I'm happy to go through the approval process you mentioned. Something flickered across his face. He hadn't expected her to respond at all. The approval process is for ambiguous cases, he said. I don't think this is ambiguous. He smiled, closed his folder, moved on. The meeting ended 10 minutes later. People filed out carefully, the way people exit rooms where something uncomfortable has happened. Quickly, quietly, without making eye contact. Betty appeared at Francine's elbow in the corridor. I'm so sorry, she said quietly. He does this. He picks someone and he just... She stopped, pressed her lips together. Francine looked at her. You didn't do anything, she said. Don't apologize for him. That evening, Francine called Sharon and reported every detail. Sharon said, hold the line. 3 more days. Francine agreed. She stood at her hotel window and looked out at Chicago. 63 witnesses. His voice on record in the meeting notes his own assistant would have typed up before noon. His printed policy in his own hands. 3 more days. She could hold the line. Friday morning felt different. Francine felt it the moment she stepped off the elevator. The office had a particular kind of quiet. Not calm, but held. Like everyone was waiting for something without knowing what it was. She signed in, collected her visitor badge, and walked to her desk. She had an assignment today. Support staff for a formal client presentation. 2 senior representatives from Hartwell Regional Bank attending a potential partnership meeting. Francine's job, materials preparation, room setup, in-room assistance during the presentation. Standard temp duties. She arrived at the conference room at 9:30 to set up. Long mahogany table, 12 chairs, a projector screen at the far end, floor-to-ceiling windows with the Chicago skyline behind it. She arranged the document folders, checked the projector, filled the water glasses. She noted the small black dome mounted in the upper corner of the room, the motion-activated recording system standard in all of Pinnacle's client-facing spaces. It clicked on at 10:04 a.m. She knew because she watched for it. Gregory arrived at 9:50. He walked in, scanned the room, checked the projector. His eyes found Francine at the side table and stopped there for just a beat too long. Then he turned and found Jonathan in the doorway. Something passed between them. Not words, just a look. The kind fathers and sons share when they've already made a decision. Francine kept arranging folders. The Hartwell representatives arrived at 10:02. 2 men, both in their 50s, both carrying the careful politeness of people who were guests in someone else's house. They shook Gregory's hand. They nodded at Francine without really seeing her. They took their seats. Staff filled in around the table. By 10:05, there were more than 60 people in the room. Gregory stood at the head of the table. He opened his mouth to begin his remarks, and then he paused. Before we get started, he said. His voice was the same pleasant, carrying voice from Wednesday. Relaxed, confident. A man completely at home. I want to take just a moment, because I think it's important for our guests to understand what kind of company Pinnacle is. We have standards here, real ones, and they apply to every single person in this building. He reached down and opened his briefcase. The room didn't understand what it was seeing at first. Francine watched comprehension move across people's faces in slow waves. Confusion, then recognition, then a horrible stillness. Electric clippers. Black, handheld, the kind you'd find in any barber shop. He held them up like a teaching tool. Our professional standards exist for a reason, Gregory said. He was almost cheerful about it. They protect our brand. They protect our client's experience. And when someone can't seem to find the time to comply, he clicked the clippers on, and the buzzing filled the room like a current running through the walls. Then leadership steps in. That's what accountability looks like. He walked toward Francine. She had maybe 3 seconds to make a decision. Running changed the story. Fighting changed the story. Either one handed him a version of this moment that he could manage. A scene, an overreaction, a difficult employee. Staying still was the only thing he couldn't spin. Staying still meant 60 witnesses watched a CEO do exactly what he chose to do, with no provocation, to a woman sitting quietly at a side table. The recording system was running. Francine sat down in the nearest chair. She sat down straight-backed, hands in her lap, and she did not move. She did not flinch when he put his hand on her shoulder. She did not look at the clippers. She looked straight ahead at the far wall, while Gregory Holt pressed the blade to her hairline and ran a strip clean through her natural hair. Dark coils fell onto the shoulders of her burgundy blazer. Gregory laughed first. A big, open laugh. The laugh of a man who found himself genuinely funny. Jonathan laughed immediately after, the way he always did, half a beat behind his father. Two of the senior VPs followed, watching Gregory's face for permission and finding it. The laughter spread through maybe a third of the room. The Hartwell representatives did not laugh. They sat very still with the expressions of men who were calculating how quickly they could leave. Betty did not laugh. She was seated along the far wall, and she was watching Francine's face, with an intensity that had nothing to do with the room around her. Francine's face was still. Not broken. Not frightened. Not humiliated. Still. The way a person is still when they are already 3 moves ahead of everyone in the room. The presentation continued. The Hartwell men left 40 minutes later with careful, uncomfortable politeness, the kind you use when you've witnessed something you're not sure how to name. Francine stood, smoothed her blazer, and walked to the elevator. Betty followed without being asked. The restroom door closed behind them. Betty was already talking before the latch caught, words coming fast and compressed, like they'd been building pressure for years, and the door closing was the only trigger they needed. "He does this," she said. "Not always with clippers, but he does this." Last year it was Sandra from accounting. He made her stand in front of the whole floor and read the dress code out loud because her skirt was an inch too short. The year before that, he told Jonathan to reassign Donna's entire client list while she was on leave, just because she pushed back on his budget numbers. HR does nothing because HR is Grace, and Grace is his family, and his family doesn't bite the hand that— Betty. Betty stopped. Francine was standing at the sink, looking at her own reflection in the mirror. The shaved strip was stark and clean, a pale line cutting straight through her natural hair, visible from 3 feet away. She raised one hand and touched the edge of it. Just once. Then she lowered her hand. "You don't need to apologize for him," Francine said. Her voice was quiet, completely level. "You didn't do anything." "I sat there," Betty said. The guilt in her voice was old and heavy. "Not just from today. I've been sitting there for 20 years. Francine turned from the mirror and looked at Betty directly. She reached into her purse. She set a business card on the counter between them. Not the temp card. Not Francine Morgan, administrative support. The other one. The real one. Betty picked it up. She read it once. Read it again. Her lips moved slightly on the second pass. Francine Warren, Managing Director, Warren Capital Holding Group. The room was very quiet. Warren Capital, Francine said, owns the parent company of Pinnacle Group. Has owned it for 6 years. I hold 80% of the voting shares. She paused, letting that number settle. Gregory Holt's salary, his bonus structure, his employment contract, his corner office, his name on that building directory downstairs, every single bit of it exists because I have chosen, until now, to let it exist. Betty put both hands flat on the counter, like she needed something solid. The conference room we were just in, Francine continued, has a motion-activated recording system. It runs automatically during all client-facing meetings. Standard Pinnacle protocol. Gregory implemented it himself 3 years ago to protect the company during client disputes. She almost smiled at that. It has been running since 10:04 this morning. Everything that happened in that room is recorded. Gregory, citing the policy by name. His exact words. Every second of what he did. 63 witnesses and 2 external bank representatives. Betty was staring at her. I came to Pinnacle because my financial reports showed something wrong, Francine said. $14 million in executive bonuses, while the support staff got cut. The cuts fell in a pattern that wasn't accidental. I needed to see the man behind those numbers before I decided what to do. So I came in the way I always come in when I need the truth. Quietly. From the bottom. Where people show you who they really are. She picked the business card up from the counter and put it back in her purse. I had one more week planned, she said. A board meeting. A clean governance review. A controlled process. She looked at Betty steadily. He just changed my timeline. Betty found her voice. It came out smaller than usual. He doesn't know. He has no idea. He shaved your... Betty stopped. Started again. He did that to you, and he has no idea who you are. He knew exactly who he thought I was, Francine said. That's the whole point. Betty stood up straight for the first time since they'd walked in. Something was shifting behind her eyes. The weight of 20 years of careful smallness, meeting something it hadn't encountered before. A way out. Not just for Francine. Maybe for all of them. There's something in the payroll system, Betty said. Her voice was different now. Steadier. Something I found 8 months ago. I didn't know what to do with it. I didn't know who to trust. She paused. I need to show you. Not here. Francine studied her for a moment. Tonight, she said. Text me when you're clear of the building. Betty nodded. She picked up her bag. She looked at Francine one more time. This woman she'd sat 30 feet from for 4 days without knowing. This woman who had sat still in that chair while the room laughed. And something in Betty's face settled into a quiet, certain resolve. She walked out. Francine turned back to the mirror. She looked at the shaved strip one more time. 1 more week had been the plan. The plan had just changed. The coffee shop was 2 blocks from Pinnacle. Francine picked it deliberately. Far enough from the building that no one from the office would wander in. Close enough that Betty wouldn't have to travel far after a day like today. She got there first, took a corner table with her back to the wall, and ordered black coffee she didn't plan to drink. Betty arrived at 6:15, still in her work clothes, laptop bag over her shoulder. She looked smaller outside the office somehow. Like the building had been the only thing holding her upright, and now she was having to do it herself. She sat down across from Francine and put her laptop on the table without preamble. I found it 8 months ago, Betty said quietly, opening the laptop. I almost missed it. It's designed to be missed. She pulled up the payroll system through remote access and navigated 3 levels below the standard interface, past the regular accounts, past the department breakdowns, into a sublayer that had no label except a vendor code. 6 digits. Francine leaned forward. That vendor code, Betty said, doesn't correspond to any active vendor. I checked every contract on file. It doesn't exist. She opened the account. Francine looked at the numbers. She looked at them for a long time without speaking. 4 years of payroll records. Every female administrative employee, all 34 of them, paid from a rate table that ran exactly 23% below the equivalent male rate for identical job classifications. The gap wasn't random. It was consistent. The same percentage, every pay period, for 4 years. The differential was processed as a compensation adjustment and routed through the ghost vendor account, so it never surfaced in any standard payroll report. You would never find it unless you were looking for it, and you would never look for it unless something small and wrong had already caught your eye. How did you find it? Francine asked. Margaret, Betty said. She's been here 11 years. Same job title as David Piers, who's been here 4. I was processing their quarterly figures, and the gap was too clean, too exact. It didn't look like a mistake. She paused. Mistakes are messy. This was neat. Francine sat back. 34 women. 4 years. She did the math in her head before Betty pulled up the total. $812,000. Stolen in small, careful increments from women who came to work every day and never knew. Women who paid their rent and their groceries and their children's school fees out of a number that had been deliberately, systematically trimmed. Not by accident. Not by oversight. By design. Betty, Francine said, has anyone else seen this? No. You're certain? I'm the only one who runs payroll reconciliation. Betty closed the account and looked at Francine. I didn't know what to do with it. I thought about HR, but HR is Grace. I thought about going outside. Labor board, maybe. But I had no proof I hadn't made an error. No one to stand behind me. Her voice dropped. I was scared. Francine's phone buzzed. She looked at the screen. An email notification. Sender, Grace Holt, HR Director. Recipient, Betty Ordell. Subject, Employment Status Update. Francine turned the phone so Betty could see it. Betty read the subject line. Her face didn't collapse. It did something quieter and more devastating than that. It went very still. She opened it. Dear Ms. Ordell, please be advised that your employment with Pinnacle Group will be concluded effective Sunday at close of business. This decision reflects a performance assessment conducted by department leadership. Your final paycheck will be processed according to standard procedure. Please return your access credentials by end of day Friday. 20 years. A Friday evening email. Performance grounds. Betty set the phone down on the table. She didn't speak. Francine was already calling Sharon. Sharon picked up on the second ring. Francine gave her 45 seconds of information. Betty's termination, the sub-account, the $812,000, the 48-hour window. Sharon asked 2 questions. Francine answered both. Sharon said, the operational freeze goes out tonight. Midnight at the latest. Her termination is suspended pending Warren Capital compliance review. He cannot touch her. Francine ended the call and looked at Betty. Your termination is suspended, she said. You still have a job Monday morning. Betty looked up. Her eyes were wet, but her jaw was set. He found out, she said. It wasn't a question. About you. Or about me. Or both. It doesn't matter which, Francine said. She closed the laptop gently and slid it back across the table. He just made the biggest mistake of his career. She left 2 20s on the table for the untouched coffees and stood up. Go home. Get some rest. And, Betty, she waited until Betty met her eyes. Don't touch the payroll system again tonight. She walked out into the Chicago evening and called Sharon back immediately. Move everything up, she said. We start Monday. Saturday morning arrived, cold and gray. Grace Holt got to her office at 7:15. She always came in Saturdays, a habit she'd developed to stay ahead of the week. She made coffee, opened her laptop, and found the Warren Capital letter sitting in her inbox like a stone dropped in still water. She read it twice. Then she printed it and walked down the hall to Gregory's office to wait. He arrived at 8:15. He saw Grace's face before he saw the letter. He took it from her hand, read it standing in his doorway, and called his outside counsel before he'd even sat down. The call lasted 11 minutes. When it ended, Gregory set his phone on his desk with the careful, deliberate movement of a man keeping his temper on a short leash. The freeze was legitimate, binding. He could not touch Betty Ordell's employment status until Warren Capital's compliance review concluded. His own attorney had just told him so. Find out who they are, he said to Jonathan, who had appeared in the doorway sometime during the phone call. Warren Capital. I want a name. I want to know why they moved now, and who gave them a reason to. Jonathan nodded. He had his phone out before he left the room. By noon, he'd hired an outside research firm. Francine knew the clock was running. She gave herself 36 hours, maybe less, before Jonathan's firm connected Warren Capital to Francine Warren to Francine Morgan, sitting 30 feet from his father's office, which meant Saturday was not a rest day. Saturday was evidence day. She spent the morning back at Pinnacle. Not as a temp. The weekend skeleton staff didn't question someone with a valid access badge moving quietly through the building. Conducting the conversations she hadn't had time for during the week. Careful conversations, casual on the surface. She was just getting to know her colleagues. Just being friendly. What she found built slowly in her chest, like pressure looking for a release valve. She found Carla first. Carla Scadler was 55, a senior accountant who had been at Pinnacle for 14 years. She had a desk covered in family photos and a manner that was warm and precise in equal measure. Francine sat with her for 20 minutes in the break room and heard the story without asking for it directly. Carla had a way of talking about the job that let the truth surface on its own. 6 promotion cycles in 8 years. 6 times Carla had applied. 6 times the role had gone to a man. The most recent one, 31 years old, had needed Carla to train him for his first 4 months. He now made $40,000 more per year than she did. Carla said this without bitterness. She said it the way people describe weather. Something that happens to you, that you have no particular power over. That flatness in her voice was the saddest part. Then there was Prim Wenzel, 47, project manager. 13 years at the company, a client portfolio she had built relationship by relationship over a decade. She'd taken approved medical leave 8 months ago. 6 weeks. Fully documented, fully authorized. She came back to find her office reassigned to a smaller room, her client accounts transferred to a 29-year-old male colleague, and her title unchanged, so the demotion didn't technically exist on paper. She'd stayed because she needed the health insurance. She said that simply, without drama. I needed the insurance. As if that explained everything that had been taken from her, which it did. Francine found 3 more women before lunch. Different stories with the same skeleton underneath. Dismissed, diminished, rearranged, and left to absorb it quietly because the alternative was losing what little they still had. None of them knew about the sub-account. None of them knew their paychecks had been quietly trimmed for 4 years. They each believed their wound was personal. A one-time judgment call, an individual manager's bias. They had no idea they were all living inside the same machine. Francine returned to her hotel at 2 p.m. and sat with it. The files, the faces, Carla's flat voice describing her 6th rejection, Prim saying I needed the insurance like an apology. Her phone buzzed. Betty. I pulled everything I've been keeping. 4 years. All of it. I have a drive. Francine typed back. Tomorrow morning. The parking garage. Level B2. She set the phone down and looked out the window at the gray Chicago sky. Gregory spent Saturday trying to find her name. She spent Saturday finding his. They weren't the same kind of looking. His would cost him everything. Hers already had. Level B2 of the Pinnacle parking garage was exactly what Francine needed it to be. Dim, concrete, and empty on a Sunday morning. No building security cameras on the sub-levels. She'd confirmed that Thursday afternoon while reviewing the building's security layout, which she had full access to as majority shareholder, whether Gregory knew it or not. She got there at 8:45 and waited beside a support column near the stairwell. Betty arrived at 8:52, moving quickly, a canvas tote over one shoulder. She was dressed like someone running errands. Jeans, flat shoes, a jacket with the collar turned up. She'd clearly thought about not being noticed. Smart woman. She stopped in front of Francine and reached into the tote without preamble. What she produced was small, unremarkable. A plain black thumb drive, the cheap kind that came in multi-packs. She held it out in the flat of her palm like it weighed more than it did. Francine took it. 4 years, Betty said. Payroll anomalies, cross-referenced against job classification records for every affected employee. I built the comparison tables myself, on my own time, on my personal laptop. Nobody has seen them. Francine turned the drive over in her fingers. There's an email chain on there too, Betty continued. Between Gregory and Jonathan, 14 months ago. I found it in a shared administrative folder that Jonathan forgot to restrict access on. He was using it to coordinate with Gregory directly, bypassing the standard ops channels. What does it say? Betty's jaw tightened. It says, and I'm quoting because I've read it enough times that I have it memorized, that they need to keep admin overhead controlled by, and these are Gregory's exact words, managing the demographic composition of the pool. The parking garage was very quiet. There are also 3 HR complaints on there, Betty said, filed by employees over the last 4 years. Formal written complaints about pay disparity and discriminatory reassignment. Each one is stamped received by Grace's office. She paused. Not one of them was ever investigated. Not one received a response. They just stopped existing. Francine closed her fingers around the drive. She thought about Carla Scadler describing her 6th rejection in a flat, weathered voice. She thought about Prim Wenzel saying, I needed the insurance like it was a confession. She thought about 34 women who came to work every day and never knew their paychecks had been quietly carved down while the men beside them collected the full amount. "You kept this for 4 years," Francine said. "Alone, without knowing if it would ever matter." Betty looked at the concrete floor for a moment. "Someone had to remember," she said simply. Francine looked at her. "You kept it for the right person." Betty nodded once, tightly, like she didn't trust herself to respond to that. "I need you to do something for me," Francine said. "Monday morning you show up, you go to wherever Gregory has reassigned you, and you do your job without giving him any reason to escalate. Don't access the payroll system. Don't discuss this with anyone. Don't let him see that anything has changed. He's going to know something is wrong. He already knows something is wrong. That's why he put you in the basement. What he doesn't know is how wrong." Francine pocketed the drive. "The board meeting notice goes out Monday afternoon. 48 hours after that, this is over." Betty was quiet for a moment. When she spoke, her voice was careful. "Jonathan hired a research firm. I heard Gregory mention it Friday afternoon before I left. I know. They're going to find you." "Yes," Francine said. "They are. Probably by Sunday night, maybe Monday morning. Which is why the board notice goes out before they can do anything with what they find." She looked at Betty steadily. 36 hours. That's all we need." Betty pulled her jacket tighter against the garage cold. She looked at the drive-shaped outline in Francine's pocket. 4 years of her own careful, quiet, frightened work, now in someone else's hands. The right hands, she had decided. She had to have decided that. Or she wouldn't be standing in a parking garage on a Sunday morning handing over the only leverage she had. "What happens to me?" Betty said. "When this is over, what happens to the people who work there?" Francine held her gaze. "That depends on what I find when I'm running the company," she said. "But I can tell you this. The people who kept their heads down and did their jobs and got treated like they were nothing." She paused. "They're the whole reason I'm here." Betty walked back to the stairwell. Francine waited until her footsteps faded, then took out her phone and called Sharon. "Start the board notice," she said. "We move tomorrow." Monday arrived like a held breath finally released. Francine got to Pinnacle at 8:30, same as always. Same gray blazer, same tote bag, same visitor badge from the same slightly harassed receptionist. She walked to her desk, sat down, and opened the temp work assignment on her computer like it was any other Monday. She was the stillest person in the building. The office felt different, though, tighter. The weekend had done something to the atmosphere, wound it up another notch. People moved a little faster, spoke a little quieter, kept their eyes on their own work with the focused attention of employees who had learned that visibility was dangerous right now. Betty wasn't at her desk. Francine noticed that immediately. Betty's workstation, 30 feet away, slightly to the left, always occupied by 8:15, was empty. Laptop gone. Personal items gone. The small framed photo of Betty's daughter that lived beside her monitor, gone. Francine kept her face neutral and her eyes moving. At 9:05, she saw Betty emerge from the stairwell door at the far end of the floor. Betty was carrying a small cardboard box, the kind people carry when they've been told to clear out a space quickly. She walked with her head up and her jaw set, but her eyes were moving the way eyes move when someone is working very hard not to look at the floor. She didn't come back to her workstation. She went straight to the elevator, and the doors closed behind her. Francine understood immediately. She pulled out her personal phone under the desk and texted, "Where are you?" The response came 3 minutes later. "Basement. Records. Storage. B1. They cut my system access." Francine read the text twice. Then she set the phone face down on the desk and looked at her computer screen without seeing it. He couldn't fire Betty. The operational freeze made that impossible. So he'd done the next best thing. Moved her somewhere dark and quiet and disconnected from the payroll system she'd spent 20 years managing. Somewhere she couldn't see anything. Somewhere she couldn't hand anyone anything. It was a smart move. Francine gave him that. But he'd made it one day too late. At 10:30, the corner office door opened. Gregory came out with Jonathan at his shoulder. They walked through the floor together, which Gregory almost never did. He usually moved between meetings without acknowledging the open workspace. Today, he was walking slowly, looking at things, or looking for something. His eyes moved across the room in a sweep that was almost casual. Almost. His gaze passed over Francine's desk without stopping. Just a temp. Nothing there. But Jonathan looked at her for half a beat longer than he should have. Francine returned her eyes to her screen. They knew, or they were close enough to knowing that the difference didn't matter. Jonathan's research firm had delivered something. Maybe not the full picture yet, but enough to make both of them walk the floor on a Monday morning like they were taking inventory of what they still controlled. The answer was less than they thought. At 2:15 p.m., Sharon sent the board meeting notice. It went out on Warren Capital Holding Group letterhead, distributed simultaneously to every Pinnacle board member via registered electronic delivery. Formal language, precisely worded, legally impeccable. Warren Capital Holding Group, majority shareholder, hereby calls an emergency governance review. All board members are required to attend. Wednesday, 10 Teeter, Sire to AM, Pinnacle Group, main conference room, 40th floor. It did not name Francine. It didn't need to. Gregory received his copy at 2:17. Francine knew this because at 2:19 she heard his office door close. Not slam, but close with the particular firmness of a man who needed a wall between himself and his floor. He was on the phone for the rest of the afternoon. She could see him through the glass, pacing. Jonathan went in and out 3 times. Grace arrived at 4:30 and didn't leave until after Francine had packed up her temp bag and headed for the elevator at 5 Receipt. That evening, Francine sat at her hotel desk and laid out everything. Betty's thumb drive contents, organized and labeled. The meeting room recording, already transferred to Warren Capital's secure server. The payroll sub-account documentation. The email chain. The 3 buried HR complaints. Sharon called at 8:00. His new legal team filed their appearance this afternoon, Sharon said. Hostile shareholder defense specialists. He's been preparing for something like this for a while. How long? Long enough, Sharon said. He didn't hire them today, Francine. He hired them 2 months ago. Francine looked at the evidence spread across her desk. Good, she said. Let him be prepared. She picked up Betty's thumb drive and turned it over in her fingers. He still doesn't know what's on this. Tuesday felt like the eye of a storm. Francine arrived at 8:30, same as always. Badge, tote bag, desk. She sat down and opened her temp assignment. Data entry, filing, the invisible work that kept offices running, while men in corner offices took credit for the numbers. She did it efficiently and without complaint, because that was what Francine Morgan did. And Francine Morgan still had 1 more day to exist. The office knew something was coming. Not the details. Most people had no idea what Warren Capital was or what an emergency governance review meant. But they felt the pressure change the way animals feel weather. Conversations were shorter. Lunch breaks were taken at desks. The senior VPs moved in and out of Gregory's office in a rotating pattern that had the rhythm of a war council. Francine moved through it all like still water. She had 3 things to accomplish today. The first was the recording. At 10 a.m. she sent a formal request through Sharon's firm to Pinnacle's building management. Warren Capital, as majority shareholder, was exercising its system access rights to preserve and transfer a specific conference room recording from Friday morning to the Warren Capital secure server. Building management had the request in writing, and the legal authority confirmed before noon. The recording, Gregory citing the policy by name, the Clippers, 63 witnesses, 2 bank representatives, every second of it, was locked in a place Gregory could not touch by 12:30 p.m. Francine received Sharon's confirmation text and deleted it immediately. The second thing was Jerome. She called Jerome Banks from her hotel during lunch. She never made personal calls from the building, not on any phone that touched Pinnacle's network. Jerome answered on the first ring, which was how Jerome always answered when Francine called. 20 years of partnership had made him attentive to her timing. She told him everything: the wage theft sub-account, Betty's documentation, the email chain with its careful, incriminating language about managing demographic composition, the 3 buried HR complaints, the $812,000 stolen from 34 women over 4 years. Jerome listened without interrupting, which was one of the things she valued most about him. When she finished, he said, "You want me to hold it ready?" "Wednesday afternoon," Francine said. "If the board meeting goes the way I expect it to go, I need you to move immediately." The Illinois Department of Labor. Full formal complaint, fully authenticated, everything documented. "And if it doesn't go the way you expect?" "Then we move faster," she said. "Either way, Jerome, by Wednesday night, the state has this." Jerome said, "It'll be ready before you walk into that room." She trusted that completely. The third thing was the journalist. His name was Robert Hale. She'd known him since 1998, when he was a young financial reporter covering her first major acquisition, and she was a 34-year-old woman in a room full of men who kept directing their questions to her male attorney. Robert had directed his questions to her. She'd remembered that for 28 years. She called him from the hotel at 2 p.m. "I have a story," she said. "It's ready. When I say it's ready. I need you available Wednesday afternoon." Robert, who had learned long ago that when Francine Warren called with a story, it was worth rearranging his schedule, said, "I'll be available." All of it goes together: the video, the wage theft data, the policy, the email chain. I'll release everything simultaneously. "How big is this?" Francine thought about Carla Scadler's flat voice. "Prim Wenzel's I needed the insurance." Betty standing in a parking garage, holding 4 years of quiet, frightened documentation in the palm of her hand. "Big enough," she said. She left Pinnacle at 5:12 p.m. for the last time as Francine Morgan. She didn't make a moment of it. She packed up the tote bag, returned the visitor badge to the reception desk, and walked to the elevator. The receptionist said, "Have a good evening," without looking up. Francine said thank you, and meant it for reasons the receptionist would never know. In the elevator, she looked at her reflection in the polished metal doors, the shaved strip in her hair, the temp blazer, the woman Gregory Holt had looked at and seen nothing worth being careful about. Tomorrow she would walk back into this building as herself. She rode down 40 floors and walked out into the Chicago evening. One more night. Then it was over. Francine dressed deliberately. Deep blue dress. Her own shoes, not the flat, forgettable temp shoes, but the ones she wore when she walked into rooms that needed to understand immediately what they were dealing with. She stood at the hotel mirror and looked at her reflection, the close-cut side where Gregory had run the clippers, the long sweep of the rest, dramatic against her face. She had styled it that morning with intention, not to hide the damage, but to own it, to make it a statement before she said a single word. She looked like herself. For the first time in 6 days, she looked exactly like herself. Sharon met her in the hotel lobby at 9:30. They didn't talk much in the car. They didn't need to. 14 years of partnership had given them a shorthand that made words mostly ceremonial at moments like this. They arrived at Pinnacle at 9:45. The receptionist looked up, looked at Francine, and didn't recognize her. Not Francine Morgan. No badge request, no visitor sign-in clipboard extended. Just uncertainty. Sharon placed a letter on the reception desk. "Warren Capital Holding Group. We're expected." The receptionist made a phone call. Someone said to let them through. They walked to the elevator and rode it to the 40th floor without being stopped. The conference room was already filling. Board members, 8 of them, Gregory's appointments, and Francine's too, settled into seats and opened the document folders Sharon had placed at every position before anyone else arrived. Francine had arranged that through building management the previous evening. Her name on the cover sheet, her authority on every page. She sat at the head of the table. She put her hands flat on the mahogany and felt the solidity of it. This table, this room, this building that had belonged to her for 6 years, while the man who thought he ran it performed his power in front of 63 witnesses and 2 bank clients, and a recording system he implemented himself. Board members were reading the cover sheet. She watched understanding move across their faces. Then Gregory walked in. He came through the door at 10:15 exactly, with Jonathan one step behind him. He was already looking toward the head of the table, already preparing to take it. And then he saw Francine sitting in his chair, and he stopped so completely that Jonathan almost walked into his back. The silence lasted 4 full seconds. Francine watched recognition work its way through him. It started in his eyes, moved to his jaw, settled into something that wasn't quite fear, but was adjacent to it. The look of a man whose footing has just shifted without warning. "Good morning, Mr. Holt," Francine said. Her voice was even and clear and carried to every corner of the room. "I believe this is actually our second meeting this week." Gregory said nothing for a moment. Then he pulled out the chair to her left, not the head, not his usual position, just a chair, and sat down like that had been his intention all along. The board members were very still. Sharon stood and began walking through the document folder. Warren Capital's ownership position, the legal basis for the governance review, the timeline of concerns that had prompted it. She was 3 minutes in when every phone in the room buzzed simultaneously. Francine knew what it was before anyone looked at their screens. The emergency injunction had been filed at 10:03 a.m. Gregory's legal team, the hostile shareholder defense specialists he'd hired 2 months ago, had timed it with the precision of an ambush, because that was exactly what it was. The argument was technical and deliberate. The right of first refusal clause in Warren Capital's original purchase agreement had not been properly executed during Francine's 2022 holding company restructure, rendering her current voting share claim legally contestable for up to 90 days pending contract dispute review. 90 days. The board members read their screens. Then they looked at Gregory. Then they looked at their screens again. Francine watched 6 men calculate their own positions with the focused efficiency of people suddenly aware of their personal liability. The vote to table the governance review took 4 minutes, 6-2. The 2 dissenters were Francine's direct appointees. Everyone else folded toward the power they knew, the power that signed their board fees. Francine and Sharon walked out. They rode the elevator down in silence. On the sidewalk, Sharon said quietly, "The right of first refusal argument is thin, but correctly filed injunctions hold for 90 days regardless of merit." 90 days. Enough time to move money, restructure evidence, and eliminate witnesses through a voluntary separation package that Betty had just texted to report. Gregory had announced it to staff while Francine was still in the elevator. All employees over 45. 2 weeks to decide. Francine looked up at the Pinnacle building. 40 floors of glass catching the Wednesday morning light. "He froze my ownership," she said. "He didn't freeze my evidence." She took out her phone and called Jerome. Jerome picked up before the first ring finished. Francine was still standing on the sidewalk outside Pinnacle, Sharon beside her, the Wednesday morning traffic moving past them like nothing had happened. Like the world hadn't just tried to close a door on her. "He filed an injunction," she said. 90 days, if it holds. He's also announced a voluntary separation package targeting everyone over 45. 2 weeks to decide. He's trying to clear the witnesses before anyone can depose them. Jerome was quiet for exactly 2 seconds. "Where are you?" "Outside the building." "Go back to the hotel," he said. "I'll call you in an hour." She didn't go back to the hotel. She walked. Chicago in the morning, cold and bright. The lake wind coming off the water with the particular indifference of a city that had seen everything and was impressed by none of it. Sharon walked beside her without speaking, which was exactly right. Francine was thinking about the injunction. Gregory had prepared it 2 months ago, not for her specifically, but for any majority shareholder action. A preemptive defense, generic and ready-made, waiting to be filed the moment someone moved against him. The right of first refusal argument was technically creative and substantively weak. It would not survive a full legal challenge, but it didn't need to survive. It needed to breathe for 90 days while Gregory restructured, relocated, and eliminated. The injunction froze her ownership rights. It froze nothing else. Back at the hotel at noon, Francine laid everything out on the desk. Betty's thumb drive, the authenticated payroll documents Sharon had prepared over the weekend, the email chain, Gregory and Jonathan, 14 months ago, discussing managing the demographic composition of the pool in clear, unambiguous, legally catastrophic language. The 3 buried HR complaints, each stamped received and never processed. Jerome called at 12:47. "I've spoken to 2 people at the Illinois Department of Labor," he said. "People I know. I've described the nature of the complaint without specifics. They want it formally submitted today. How long before they open a review? If the documentation is as clean as you're describing, 48 hours, maybe less." He paused. "Francine, wage theft at this scale, documented this precisely, is not something they put in a drawer. $800,000 across 34 employees over 4 years with paper trails showing deliberate concealment. That is not a quiet complaint. That becomes an investigation." Francine looked at Betty's carefully organized comparison tables on her screen. 14 months of payroll anomalies, cross-referenced, formatted, impossible to misread. Betty had done that alone, at home, on her personal laptop, because someone had to remember. "Submit it," Francine said. "Everything. Full formal complaint, fully authenticated. I want it in their system before close of business today." "It'll be done by 3 p.m., Jerome said. Sharon, sitting across the desk, was already drafting the submission documents. She looked up and nodded once. At 2:01 p.m., Francine called Robert Hale. "Tomorrow morning," she said. "The story runs tomorrow." Robert had been waiting by his phone since Tuesday. "I'm ready. Walk me through it." Francine spent 40 minutes on the call. She gave him the wage theft data, summarized, clearly explained, numbers that any reader could understand without a finance background. She gave him the policy poster, the photograph she'd taken on day 1. She gave him the email chain, with Gregory's exact language flagged and contextualized. She told him about Betty, not by name, not yet, a 20-year employee who had kept records alone for 4 years because she had nowhere else to take them. Then she released the video link. Robert was quiet for a moment after she sent it. She heard him watching it. "Francine," he said. "I know," she said. "This is going to be very large." "I know that too." She gave him one instruction. "The wage theft filing with the state runs alongside the video. Not after, alongside. I don't want this to look like a personal grievance. I want people to see exactly what this is. A pattern, documented, systemic, and now in the hands of the state of Illinois." Robert said, "I'll have it ready for a 6 a.m. publication." That evening, Francine called Betty. Betty's voice was quiet and careful. She was in her apartment, away from the building, but she'd spent the day in the basement records room, and the containment of it was still in her throat. Francine told her what was coming: the state filing, the article, the video going public in the morning. Betty listened without interrupting. When Francine finished, Betty said, "Those women, the ones he underpaid. Are they going to find out?" "Yes," Francine said. A long pause. "Good," Betty said. "They deserve to know what was taken from them." Francine looked at the hotel window, the city going dark outside. "Get some sleep," she said. "Tomorrow changes everything." Francine's phone buzzed at 9:47 p.m. She was sitting at the hotel desk reviewing the state filing documents Sharon had finalized that afternoon, cross-checking every figure, every date, every reference against Betty's original records. The kind of review you do not because you doubt the work, but because when something this important goes to the state of Illinois, you want every decimal point to be beyond argument. She looked at the screen. "Betty." She picked up immediately. "I found something." Betty's voice was controlled. The deliberate, careful control of someone who has just seen something alarming and is refusing to let the alarm run ahead of the information. "Tell me," Francine said. "I still have a backup login for the payroll system. A personal one. I set it up 3 years ago after we had a server outage, and I lost a week of reconciliation work. IT never revoked it because they don't know it exists." A short pause. "I used it tonight. I went back in." Francine was already sitting straight. 3 days ago, Betty said, 2 days after your board meeting notice went out, someone moved money. $2.3 million from Pinnacle's operating account, transferred to an LLC called Gregory's name, but registered in his wife's name. The hotel room was very quiet. It has no corresponding business record, Betty continued. No board approval, no documented purpose, no vendor contract, no service agreement, nothing. It processes in the system as a standard transfer, but there is no paperwork behind it anywhere. Francine stood up from the desk and walked to the window. $2.3 million. Moved 3 days ago. The timing was not coincidental. It never was with men like Gregory. The moment Warren Capital's board meeting notice landed in his inbox, he had started moving assets, not panicking, planning. The way a man plans when he has done something wrong and has enough experience to know that preparation is the only thing standing between him and consequences. Betty, Francine said, I need you to secure those screenshots right now. 3 separate locations. Your personal email, a cloud backup, and forwarded directly to Sharon. Do all 3 before you do anything else. She heard keyboard sounds immediately. Betty was already moving. Done, Betty said 2 minutes later. All 3. Close the backup login and don't use it again. Already closed. Francine walked back to the desk and called Sharon. It was nearly 10 p.m. Sharon answered on the second ring with the alert, focused voice of someone who had been expecting a call. Francine described the transfer in precise terms. The amount, the timing, the destination, LLC, the absence of any supporting documentation. When she finished, Sharon was quiet for 3 seconds. The kind of quiet that meant she was thinking very fast. That's not aggressive accounting, Sharon said. That's not a gray area. That's embezzlement. Yes, Francine, this changes everything. His injunction protects his corporate position from your shareholder challenge. It protects absolutely nothing from a criminal inquiry. I know. If this goes to the state attorney, it needs to go to the state attorney, Francine said. But not tonight. Tonight, I want you to hold it. We use it as leverage first. If Gregory takes the exit I'm going to offer him, the state investigation proceeds independently, and we don't need to be the ones who escalate it. If he doesn't take it, she paused, then Jerome makes a phone call, and Gregory finds out what it feels like when the state of Illinois decides to look very closely at your bank records. Sharon said, Understood. I'll have the documentation ready to move in either direction. Francine ended the call and stood in the center of the hotel room. She thought about what it meant. That Gregory had moved that money 3 days ago. That he had sat across from her in that boardroom, filed his injunction, watched her walk out onto the sidewalk, and believed he was winning. While the whole time, in the background, he was moving $2.3 million into his wife's LLC because some part of him, the part that had been doing things like this long enough to know how they ended, was already preparing to run. Frightened men made mistakes. This was the biggest one he had ever made. She picked up her phone and sent Betty one final message. You did the right thing. Get some sleep. Tomorrow, the article goes live and everything shifts. She set the phone down and looked at the window. The city below, indifferent and alive. In the morning, Robert Hale's article would publish. The video would go public. The state wage theft filing would already be sitting in the Illinois Department of Labor's system. And Gregory Holt, who had stood behind a woman in a burgundy blazer and shaved her hair in front of 63 witnesses, would wake up to find out exactly what kind of woman she was. Francine's alarm went off at 5:45 a.m. She was already awake. She'd slept in pieces. 2 hours, then an hour. Then lying in the dark listening to the city and running through contingencies the way she'd done the night before every major move of her career. Not from anxiety, from discipline. Preparation was the only thing that looked like confidence from the outside. At 6:08 a.m., she opened her laptop and navigated to Robert Hale's publication page. The article was live. The headline was clean and direct. The kind Robert wrote when he wanted the facts to hit without obstruction. Chicago CEO caught on camera enforcing discriminatory hair policy on black employee. Firm now faces state wage theft investigation. Below the headline, the video. Francine pressed play and watched it the way you watch something you lived through, with the particular distance of a person who was present for every second of it, and is now seeing it the way the rest of the world will. Gregory behind her, hand on her shoulder, clippers running. Her own face in profile, completely still. Dark coils of natural hair falling onto a burgundy blazer. She watched it for 30 seconds. Then she closed the laptop and got dressed. By 9 a.m., the article had 1 million views. Sharon texted, "It's moving." By noon, it had 4 million. National news desks picked it up before 10 a.m. First the Chicago outlets, then the wire services, then the cable networks. By 1 p.m., 3 cable news channels were running the video in their daytime programming with employment attorneys on split screen, explaining, with visible and increasing outrage, exactly how many laws the footage appeared to document being broken. The professionalism policy poster, Francine's photograph, taken on day 1 with the unhurried patience of someone who knew she'd need it eventually, appeared in every article. Hair must be neat, controlled, and non-distracting. Voluminous, unrestrained, or culturally specific styles may require prior approval. Legal analysts read it on air and described it in terms that made even the anchors shift uncomfortably. By 3:00 p.m., the video had 6 million views. By 3:15, 3 of Pinnacle's largest corporate clients had suspended their contracts. Francine watched the client suspensions come in through Sharon, who was monitoring Pinnacle's communications through Warren Capital's shareholder access. The first was a pharmaceutical company with a prominent DEI initiative and a communications team that had been watching the coverage since 10 a.m. Their contract suspension letter cited the video directly and used the phrase reputational alignment concerns. The second was a regional insurance group. The third, and largest, was a national logistics firm whose own legal team had apparently advised immediate distance. 3 contracts. The combined value, significant enough that every board member who had voted to table the governance review 2 days ago was now recalculating their personal exposure with the focused urgency of people who had made a wrong bet and were watching the odds shift in real time. At 2:30 p.m., Gregory issued a statement. Francine read it on her phone. It was 4 paragraphs of carefully constructed corporate language that accomplished nothing. He called the video misleading. He called Francine a disgruntled temporary employee, making opportunistic allegations. He said Pinnacle stood by its professional standards and would be reviewing the matter internally. He did not mention the state wage theft filing. His legal team had not told him about it yet, or if they had, he had not understood what it meant. He did not mention the $2.3 million transfer. He did not mention Betty. The statement lasted about 40 minutes before it became its own story. Journalists pulling it apart sentence by sentence, pointing out that calling a majority shareholder a disgruntled temp was either an extraordinary strategic error or evidence that Gregory Holt genuinely had no idea who Francine Warren was until sometime in the last 72 hours. Both things, Francine reflected, were true. At 4:00 p.m., Sharon called. 2 board members have contacted my firm independently, she said. Personal inquiries. They want to understand their fiduciary exposure. What did you tell them? That their exposure depends entirely on how quickly and completely they cooperate with the majority shareholders' governance review. Good. There's something else, Sharon said. Jonathan Holt hasn't been seen in the office since noon. Francine looked out the hotel window. The city going gold in the late afternoon light. Gregory's lawyers called mine an hour ago, Sharon continued. They want a meeting. Francine said, tell them Monday morning. Our terms, our location. She ended the call and picked up her coffee. Finally, after hours of letting it go cold. 6 million views. 3 suspended contracts. 2 board members looking for an exit. And Gregory Holt, who had stood in a boardroom 4 days ago with absolute certainty that he was untouchable, was about to find out what it felt like when the ground disappeared. Monday morning arrived with the clean, certain energy of something that had already been decided. Francine dressed the same way she had dressed the previous Wednesday. Deep blue dress, her own shoes, the style in her hair that transformed Gregory's damage into something deliberate and striking. But this Monday felt different from last Wednesday. Last Wednesday, she had walked into that boardroom carrying hope and preparation. This Monday, she walked in carrying something heavier and more reliable than both: evidence, momentum, and the knowledge that Gregory Holt had spent the weekend watching his company bleed out in real time and had run out of moves. She met Sharon in the hotel lobby at 8:30. "His lawyers called again this morning," Sharon said as they walked to the car. "Early, 6:52 a.m. "Nervous," Francine said. "Desperate," Sharon said, which was more precise. They took a conference room at Sharon's firm, Neutral Ground, which was the only kind Francine was willing to offer. She was not walking back into Pinnacle's building for a negotiation. She would walk back in when she owned the chair at the head of that table without an injunction trying to argue otherwise. Gregory's lead attorney arrived at 9 hours with a junior associate carrying 2 briefcases. His name was Whiteford, mid-50s, silver-haired, the expensive, unhurried manner of a man who charged $800 an hour and wanted you to feel every dollar of it. He had clearly not slept well. The expensive manner was doing more work than usual. Francine sat across from him, Sharon beside her. No one offered coffee. Whiteford opened with a version of, "Let's find a path forward that works for everyone," the kind of language attorneys used when their client had stopped having leverage but hadn't quite admitted it yet. Francine let him finish. Then she spoke. "There are 2 options," she said. "I'll give them to you once." Whiteford nodded, pen ready, performing composure. "Option A," Francine said. "Mr. Holt drops the injunction and resigns as CEO of Pinnacle Group, effective immediately. He provides full and unobstructed cooperation with the Illinois Department of Labor's wage theft investigation. Complete access, complete documentation, complete testimony if required. In exchange, I will not file an additional personal civil action for the incident on Friday of last week. And I will not proactively escalate the additional financial findings we have developed over the past 72 hours to the state attorney's office." She paused 1 beat. "I cannot and will not impede any inquiry the state has already opened or chooses to open independently. That is outside my authority, and I would not exercise it if it weren't." Whiteford's pen had stopped moving. "Option B," Francine continued. "The injunction proceeds to court, at which point the complete evidentiary record, the conference room recording, 4 years of payroll documentation, the internal email chain in which your client and his son discuss managing the demographic composition of the administrative pool in those exact words, the wage theft sub-account records, and a financial transfer your client made 3 days ago from Pinnacle operating funds to a personal LLC registered in his wife's name, becomes public court record in its entirety." She let that sit for exactly 3 seconds. Every Pinnacle client, every financial press outlet in the state of Illinois, and the state attorney's office will have unrestricted access to all of it without any mediation from me. The room was completely still. Whiteford looked at the table for a moment, then at Francine. His expensive composure had developed a visible crack, not in his expression exactly, but somewhere behind it, in the place where a man keeps his honest assessment of a situation he cannot win. "I'll need to speak with my client," he said. "Of course," Francine said. "You have until noon." Whiteford called back at 11:42 a.m. Sharon took the call on speaker. Francine sat across from her and watched her face. The call lasted 4 minutes. When it ended, Sharon set the phone down and looked at Francine. "He takes option A," she said. "Injunction dropped by close of business today. Resignation letter delivered to the board by 5 p.m. Full cooperation with the state labor investigation confirmed in writing." Francine nodded once. "Jonathan?" she asked. "Not covered by the agreement," Sharon said. "He's on his own." "Good," Francine said. She stood and picked up her bag. Outside Sharon's conference room windows, Chicago was bright and cold, and completely indifferent to the fact that Gregory Holt had just run out of road. Francine thought about a burgundy blazer with dark coils of natural hair on the shoulders, She thought about 63 witnesses. She thought about a recording system that Gregory himself had installed. He handed me everything, she thought. He did it in the name of standards. "Call the board," she said to Sharon. "I want to be in that room by 3 o'clock." The boardroom looked different from the head of the table. Francine had noticed that on Wednesday, how the room changed depending on where you sat in it. From the side, along the wall where Betty had watched everything, it was a room where things happened to you. From the chair at the head, it was a room where you decided what happened next. Francine sat in that chair at 3 p.m. and put her hands flat on the mahogany and felt the solidity of it beneath her palms. 8 board members filed in. No Gregory, no Jonathan. Grace was not a board member and therefore not present, which meant she was somewhere in the building still, unaware that the ground had already shifted beneath her feet. The board members sat down. They were cooperative in the particular way of people who had spent the weekend watching 3 client contracts evaporate and 2 colleagues contact personal attorneys. Not repentant. Francine didn't need repentance. She needed compliance, and compliance was exactly what 6 men who had voted to table her governance review 3 days ago were now prepared to offer with both hands. Sharon walked them through the resignation letter. Gregory Holt, CEO of Pinnacle Group, effective immediately. The injunction dropped. The state labor investigation unobstructed. The vote to install Francine as interim CEO took less than 4 minutes. Unanimous. She had 3 things to do before the day ended. The first took 11 minutes. She called Betty from the boardroom, still seated at the head of the table, board members present, and told her the voluntary separation package was nullified, effective immediately. Every employee over 45 retained their position. Every termination from the preceding 2 years was flagged for wrongful termination review. Betty would receive formal documentation within the hour. Betty said nothing for a moment. Then, all of them? All of them, Francine said. She heard Betty exhale, a long, slow release, like something that had been compressed for a very long time, finally finding space to expand. The second thing took 20 minutes and required Sharon to be present as witness. Jonathan Holt. Terminated for cause. Effective immediately. The termination letter cited specific policy violations, the email chain in which he had used the phrase managing the demographic composition of the pool, and his direct role in Betty Ordell's retaliatory basement reassignment. The letter was written to survive any legal challenge Jonathan chose to bring. Francine had made certain of that. Grace Holt. Terminated for cause. Effective immediately. Her letter cited her role in the 3 buried HR complaints, the Betty Ordell termination attempt, and her documented failure to conduct any investigation into formal employee grievances over a 4-year period. Both letters were delivered by Sharon's associate before 4:30 p.m. The professionalism policy poster, the laminated notice Francine had photographed on her very first morning, the one that had required pre-approval for natural black hairstyles, the one Gregory had cited by name in a conference room with 63 witnesses, was removed from every floor by the facilities team before lunch was over. Nobody asked Francine if it should be done. Someone on the facilities team simply did it, which told her something useful about what the people in this building had been waiting for. The third thing was the one that mattered most. She called Betty into the office at 5 p.m. Her office now, the corner one on the 40th floor, the one with the view of Chicago that went all the way to the lake on a clear day. She had not yet moved anything in it. Gregory's things were still on the shelves. That was fine. She wouldn't be keeping them long. Betty appeared in the doorway in her basement clothes, the jeans and flat shoes she'd been wearing in the records room all day, and looked at Francine sitting behind the desk with an expression that moved through several things before settling on something that was almost disbelief. "Sit down," Francine said. Betty sat. Francine told her about the wage audit. Every female employee's compensation reviewed against equivalent male roles. All underpayments remediated with back pay plus interest. Total remediation, $1.1 million. 34 women who had come to work every day and been quietly robbed of what they had earned would receive checks within 30 days. Betty's eyes went bright. She pressed her lips together. "There's one more thing," Francine said. She slid a single sheet of paper across the desk. "Director of Employee Relations. New position. Created this afternoon. Full authority over the wage remediation program, the wrongful termination review, and the development of new employment standards for this company going forward." She paused. "The salary is on the second line." Betty looked at the paper. She looked at the number. She laughed. It came out suddenly. A real laugh, full and genuine, the kind that surprised the person it came from. Then she cried. Not quietly. Not the compressed, careful kind of emotion Francine had watched her manage all week. The other kind. The kind that had been waiting 20 years. Francine let her. She didn't rush it or fill the silence. When Betty finally steadied herself, she looked up and said, "He put me in a basement." "He did," Francine said. "And now I'm on the 40th floor." "You were always supposed to be on the 40th floor," Francine said. "You just needed the right person in this office." At dusk, Francine stood alone at the floor-to-ceiling window. The city was going amber and gold below her. 40 floors of Chicago, doing what Chicago always did. Indifferent and alive, and completely unconcerned with the reckoning that had just taken place in the building above it. Somewhere in that city, Gregory Holt was processing the fact that the voluntary separation package he had designed to eliminate witnesses had been nullified. The Illinois Department of Labor investigation was open. The state attorney's office had confirmed a financial inquiry. 3 civil discrimination lawsuits, filed by women Francine had spoken to during her undercover week, had been announced by close of business, supported by Francine's legal team, pro bono, without restriction. His face had been on the evening news at 5:30 beneath a chyron that said everything it needed to say. Francine looked at her reflection in the window glass, the close-cut side where Gregory had run the clippers, the long, dramatic sweep of the rest. She had been asked twice in the past 2 days whether she was going to fix it, restore the symmetry, take it back to what it was before. She had decided to keep it exactly as it was, because every time she looked at it, she would remember. He stood behind her with his clippers and his policy and his audience of yes-men, and he believed, completely, without question, that he was taking something from her, that the hair was the power, that making her smaller in front of 63 people would make him larger. He gave her the video, he gave her the witnesses, he gave her a recorded, documented, formally cited invocation of his own discriminatory policy, performed in front of 2 external clients, preserved by a system he installed himself, in a building that belonged to her. She raised one hand and touched the close-cut side. He thought he was enforcing his standards, she thought. He was signing his confession. She turned from the window, picked up her phone, and got back to work. If you enjoyed the story, leave a like to support my channel, and subscribe so that you do not miss out on the next one. On the screen, I have picked 2 special stories just for you. Have a wonderful day.